Hello guys, my name is Isaac Flores, and today I'll be discussing graphical user interfaces for our last Explain It video. I wanted to talk about this subject because much of what we do in programming ultimately involves graphical user interfaces to input and output data, probably as much as maybe the command line input interface. Anyways, I created this simple GUI or GUI program, and we'll see what it does. I mean, it's a simple program that you simply enter your weight and it outputs your weight, what your weight would be in Jupiter. So for instance, if you input 150 pounds on Earth and then press that convert button, then your weight in Jupiter would be 379 pounds. So now I'll talk a little bit about what goes into creating a graphical user interface in a little bit more detail. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and the main class responsible for creating a window to display the data that we can interact with is the JFrame class, which is a subclass of the container class. Now, a JFrame object is a top-level window composed of a root pane, which is responsible for managing the JFrame objects and its components, such as the menu bar and the content pane. I have a little picture here. Hopefully you guys can see it. It's sort of it's a little cartoon that kind of, I think, does a good job at explaining how a JFrame is composed and what its main components are, from the root pane to the content pane, and any additional panels that are incorporated in it. So once again, the root pane is responsible for managing the JFrame objects and its components, such as the menu bar, and the content pane is responsible for containing all the components that will form the display window in our graphical user interface, including any additional panels that will be added to the JFrame object. Now, the most fundamental components that go into creating a JFrame in an efficient graphical user interface are JLabels, which in our program we have a few. So we have, like I said, we have a few JLabels here. We have 1, 2, and 3. Now, one of the JLabels is our prompt. The second JLabel would be this image or this icon of Earth, and then the third one would be Jupiter. So JLabels allow us to output simple static text to display windows. That is when it's used as a text. It's analogous to the system printing out print line output that we use to display text when we're using the command line interface. Though JLabels are primarily used to display static text, they do have this added functionality where they can be used to display an image on our top level window. Next are JText fields, which are fields used in this window frame to either input or output text to a single line. When used as an input line, an analogy would be using a scanner class in the next line method to input a string when we're using the command line interface. Now we see that this JText field we have declared its variable name as input, and like I said, you can use a JText field as either input or output depending on whether you invoke the getText method or the setText method to either use it as an input or an output field. So similarly are JText areas, which are similar to JText fields, except that these are objects that are able to input or output multiple lines of text. Okay, with that being said, I'd like to move on to talk about JButtons, which are a fundamental component of a JFrame, and they play a crucial role in developing, I guess, an effective user interface. When a user presses a J button, an action event is generated, which can be used by a programmer to create the proper response to the intended function of the button, such as calculating the weight of this person in Jupyter, such as the case in our program. Now, in order to detect an action event that are created when a button is clicked, we implement, let's see here that we have implemented an action listener interface to our GUI class that has also been extended from our JFrame class. Now, in order to be able to detect an action event from a JField component such as a JButton or a JText field, we must first associate that component to the listener interface by adding the add action listener to this frame object, such as we have done in our program. Here we see that our convert is our JButton, which is up here, and we see that for this button we have added we have invoked this method action listener, and this refers to the frame itself, which contains the button itself, and also to the input field, which is the JText field here. Now, to specify the program response to an action event generated by the action listener interface, we use the action perform method to specify our code that will handle our response. In this case, we have declared in the block that when we press the button, we will calculate the person's weight and then calculate that weight of that person's in Jupyter, and then append that result to the JText area, which we have defined as our output. Finally, the last thing I would like to talk about is when we create a graphical user interface, how we go about telling our program how our objects in the JFrame will look or how they will be laid out. There are several ways to create the layout. We can use a graphical user interface builder, which is built into our IDE in NetBeans, but I think we must be able to do it for ourselves as well. The first thing we must do is to specify the panels whose layout we are going to be working on. In our case, is the content pane, and we see here that in order to set the layout, we first determine that we're going to get the content pane, we're going to set the layout, and our layout is going to look in a grid layout with 3 rows and 2 columns. Now, there are a variety of layout managers that we can use to create how our user interface is gonna look. There's the border layout manager, box layout, card. There's a variety of them that are available in the API documentation for Java. Now, for instance, when we use the border layout, we see that we have 5 main areas: the north, west, center, and east and south, where we can place our objects in our JFrame. Now, another thing to notice is that, for instance, if we would use, say we wanted to use the center part of this JFrame, we can also actually add another panel which would contain associated objects within that panel to our main frame, or to our main panel, which is the content pane. So that adds functionality in it that you can nest all of this layouts within each other to create the desired look that you would want for your graphical user interface. Well, for me, that's all, guys. Please feel free to provide any feedback, and thank you guys for listening. Bye-bye.